Once upon a time, upon the wind-struck lands of Stormhill, lived a widow and her twin daughters. Their names were Aurelia and Aureliette. The older of the two twins, Aurelia, was a timid and shy lass, while Aureliette, the younger of the two sisters, was strong and fearless. Together with their mother, they lived within the white walls of Stormvale Castle, ruled by their fearsome king, Godrick the Grafted. Aurelia and Aureliette had never seen this king, but their mother would tell stories of the king's gruesome appearance and grotesque demeanor. During the day, they worked tirelessly under Godrick, the castle's gatekeeper. Aurelia always cried when Godrick would come to pester her, but Aureliette would always rush in to defend her and chase off the wretched gatekeeper, and then twirl in triumph once he was gone. The pale, wrinkled man did not treat them with much kindness, forcing them to do chore after chore after chore, from sun up till sun down. But in their chambers at night, they were able to take solace in the stories that their mother would read them. Stories of small talking animals were some of Aurelia's favorites, while Aureliette prefers stories about fearsome dragons and brave warriors. But their favorites were those about the moon and the stars. Late one stormy night, the howling winds and biting cold kept Aurelia awake, and the thought of having to work under the gatekeeper come morning only made her dread tomorrow. She woke her sister looking for comfort, but Aureliette found Aurelia to be inconsolable. Aureliette then made her sister a promise. When they both turned 14, they would run away from Stormvale Castle to a place where they could see the stars together. The idea excited timid Aurelia, but equally worried her as well. Aureliette reassured her and swore to protect her to the end. But there was little she could do against the great shattering. War, famine, and disease swept the lands between, and the twins were not spared the misfortune. And just months before their 14th birthday, Aurelia and Aureliette were taken from this world. Their mother, stricken with grief, became despondent and was no longer deemed fit to serve the castle. She was soon banished from the castle with little, save for the jars of the bones and ashes of her twin daughters. Having been exiled and with no place to call home, their mother decided to fulfill her daughter's wishes to see the stars, and vowed to bury the remains of her daughters at the mountaintop of the giants where they would be closest to the stars. She set out with what little provisions she had through the forest to Liurnia and beyond, but was ambushed by a pack of storm wolves, and in her desperation, she lost Aurelia's jar of ashes to the woods. Their mother lamented the loss of her eldest twin's ashes, but had to move on lest she lose her own life to the wolves and become unable to fulfill her promise to her deceased daughters. For several years, Aurelia's ashes remained undisturbed in the forest, unbeknownst to many passerbys. One day, a maiden clad in red, by the name of Rodericka, found her jar of ashes amongst the shrubs of the forest. Rodericka seemed inexplicably drawn to her ashes, and as she slowly plunged her hands into them, Aurelia's soul was given new life as a spirit jellyfish. Confused and lost, Aurelia began to weep. The maiden held the ashes gently in her hands and tried to calm the crying spirit. And while she had no mouth from which to speak, Rodericka seemed to understand what she wanted to say. Aurelia told the Red Maiden of her mother, her twin sister, and the promise they made to each other to see the stars. Rodericka, in exchange, told her own journey across the sea to the lands between with the men she was leading to overtake Stormvale Castle. She took Aurelia's ashes with her, as to not leave the poor soul alone in the forest, to a shack near the base of the castle. There they waited for Rodericka's men to return, exchanging stories with one another, until one day they spotted one of Rodericka's men hobbling back towards her, badly injured. With shuddering breath, the soldier warned Rodericka of the terrible things that happened to the other soldiers before breathing his last. Rodericka fell deep into her grief, mourning the loss of her men, the weight of guilt pushing her spirits down even further. And for several days, Rodericka became unresponsive as she battled with her own guilt. It wasn't until when a tarnished stopped by the shack that she spoke in a long time. She spoke about the loss of her men, the guilt she felt over their death, and even spoke about entering the castle herself to be killed, but lacking the courage to do so. The Tarnished wasn't one for words at all, but something about their presence drew Aurelia towards them, and ever-perceptive Rodericka passed her ashes over to the brave Tarnished to continue her journey forward to perhaps see the stars one day. And as the ashes changed hands, she fell into a deep sleep, but was later awakened by the sound of a spirit calling Bell. Besides her was the Tarnished to whom she was entrusted, and standing before them, a fell omen with twisting horns and a beastly tail, wielding a massive cane by the name of Margit. Though they spoke no words, the Tarnished's will was clear: to fight the enemy before them and venture further into the castle. The mere thought of fighting terrified Aurelia, and yet she was faced with an undeniable inevitability. Losing here could mean the end of her journey and an unfulfilled promise. And so she fought, not only the omen before her, but against her own fears. The Tarnished exchanged blow after blow, deftly dodging and parrying Margit's cane, keeping his attention, while Aurelia shot poison from afar, weakening him further. Their battle lasted not 5 minutes, but to her it felt like an eternity. And when the battle was finally over, Aurelia was overcome with the uncertainty of her own strength and abilities, unsure if she would have what it takes to fulfill the promise she made to her sister. But before she could reconcile her own feelings, she fell into another deep sleep, only to be woken up what seemed to be moments later by the sound of the spirit calling Bell. The Tarnished that was by her side just moments before was now clad in new armor bearing new armaments, and this time a ghastly grafted man with far too many arms stood before them wielding a golden axe, introducing himself as Godrick, Lord of all that is golden. Aurelia froze. Up until this very moment, she had only heard stories about the Stormvale Castle's lord, and those stories did not compare to the grotesque figure that was Godrick the Grafted. She wanted to run away. She wanted to cry. But just as her will was about to give way to despair, a woman with the guise of a hero walked past her. Wielding 2 battle axes, she walked forward with conviction and paused beside the Tarnished. They looked back at the frightened jellyfish behind them, exchanged looks with one another, and with a small nod charged into battle. Aurelia was stunned and inspired by their determination. For a while, she floated there, mesmerized by the dance of combat before her. Not one person was without injuries, but fought for their lives. The Tarnished and the Warrior Woman seemed to have the upper hand, but the tables were swiftly turned when Godrick grafted the head of a dragon onto his arm. The once dead dragon head roared and breathed flames as if it was alive, and suddenly, Aurelia's companions were at risk of being burned or eaten alive. Without thinking, she began to shoot vials of poison at the lord of the castle, and to her efforts seemed to have no effect on him. But to the Tarnished and the Warrior Woman, each flinch, each attempt to dodge the poison bile, gave them another chance to press their advantage. When Godrick finally fell at the hands of the Tarnished, Aurelia was elated, hardly able to believe that she was capable of such a feat. Already she was thinking about how much Aurelia would love the story about how she, a Tarnished, and a warrior bested the dragon-grafted king of Stormhill Castle. And in her relief, excitement, and exhaustion, she once again fell into a deep sleep. Thus, her adventure with the Tarnished truly began beyond Stormhill Castle. Though for most of their journey together she remained asleep within her ashes, the chime of the spirit-calling bell awakened her to assist the Tarnished fight against all manners of beasts, dragons, fearsome warriors, and even ancient beings. Each awakening brought her to places beyond her wildest dreams, places she'd only heard about in stories. Caves full of beasts, the massive lake of Liurnia, the Academy of Mages known as Raya Lucaria. And on one awakening, she found herself inside the royal chambers of Raya Lucaria, before the Queen of Caria, known as Renala. But suddenly, she found herself floating above tranquil water as far as the eye can see, and on the horizon, the full moon and stars all around her. Aurelia was completely struck with awe at the beauty of the spectacle, but was soon reminded of the purpose of her summon. She fought bravely against the Mage Queen, who was also capable of summoning aid to fight by her side. Aurelia kept the attention of her Ashen servants, while the Tarnished fought to defeat the Academy's queen. And sure enough, Renala fell to the Tarnished's blade. And as she fell, the illusionary scene began to fade until they were once again surrounded by books. Aurelia wished she could gaze upon the night sky just a moment longer, even if it was only an illusion. And it was at this moment that Aurelia's resolve was made firm. Being stuck in a stormy castle for all her life, she could never imagine how vast the outside world was. Even if it was only moments at a time, each summon had brought her to new places and gave her new experiences that she would never have been able to witness in her life. And as her own consciousness faded, she became determined to go as far as she could by the Tarnished side. As she slept, she could occasionally feel the gentle hands of Rodericka upon her soul, greeting Aurelia like an old friend, and tuning her strength to be able to fight stronger opponents still. With each battle, she grew more confident in her abilities, and with each victory, she collected another new experience, another new place, another new story. And she kept all of these memories close to her heart, so that should she find her sister one day, she could share with her all that she had seen. She fought through every golden hill of the Altus Plateaus, through the rot-stricken lands of Caelid, through every nook and cranny between Mount Gelmir and the grand capital of Leondel. And it was at the very base of the great Erd Tree itself that Aurelia faced her greatest challenge yet. The fell omen that she fought at the very start of her adventure had returned with a vengeance, wielding not a cane but an iridescent black blade. The air around the Omen King, whose true name was Morgoth, stirred with conviction as the two faced off. While the Tarnished and the Omen King clashed, she provided ranged support from out of reach. So when the Omen was suddenly before her, ready to strike, Aurelia froze in complete fear as the iridescent black blade closed in on her. As the blade passed through her, she felt her strength sap away, though she felt no pain. She looked back at the towering figure before her, who glared at her with such disgust. But before she could process what had just happened, the Omen jumped away, revealing the Tarnished behind him, who had just attempted an attack. Again, without words, Aurelia and the Tarnished exchanged glances as a wave of soft regret and sorrow washed over her as if they were apologizing. It was all she needed to cleanse the fear from her soul. The remembrances of battles, the gentle hands of Rodericka, and her spiritual journey had made her stronger and more confident than this girl who died in Stormhill Castle. As the Tarnished turned once again to face the foe before them, Aurelia likewise steeled herself to see the battle to the end. Their combined efforts turned the battle to their favor, leading to a critical blow dealt by the Tarnished, which staggered the Omen King back into using his sword to support his balance. He coughed violently and let out a cry of pained anguish as his curse filled the throne room with a vile liquid.
The thrones, stained by my curse, such shame I cannot bear. Thy part in this shall not be forgiven.
Morgoth charged at the Tarnished with dripping hatred as he gained his second wind. He fought with an arsenal of magic weapons forged from light, raining swords from the sky, striking with colossal hammers, and casting massive spears at blinding speeds. It was impossible to avoid injury, but even as her strength sapped away, she was determined to see the battle to its end. And for Aurelia, her battle suddenly ended when she became the unexpected target of Morgoth's Spear of Light. The shock of suddenly receiving a lethal blow stunned her as she could feel her consciousness slowly slip away. But instead of fear, she felt peace, and felt as if she was merely falling asleep after a long, hard day. Just as her vision faded, she witnessed the Tarnished deliver the final blow, right through the Omen King's heart. She had no way of knowing that this was the end of their journey, but she was satisfied, having fought alongside them for as long as she did, as it was beyond anything she thought she was ever capable of. As the Omen King fell, so too did her spirit, as it faded away as if ashes scattered on the wind.
Where did you go?
A voice called out from the darkness. It was the voice of Aurelia, her beloved sister. A sadness came over Aurelia as she explained how she had gotten lost.
You promised me when we turn 14, we go to see the stars.
Aurelia's voice held no contempt or anger, but Aurelia felt guilty all the same over the promise she could not keep.
I've been waiting ever so long. Forever and ever it seems.
Aurelia withdrew into despair, wishing she could see her sister one last time. She would give anything if it would mean she could be with her sister once more, but having fallen to the Omen King, she believed she was no more of that world, forever trapped in death. And then she heard it. the unmistakable sound of the soul-calling bell. Its chime instantly sparked a new hope that pierced through her despair and brought her back into the light of the living world. The air was cold and soft white flakes fell from the sky, and the ruins around her was likewise blanketed in white. And in front of her floated another spirit jellyfish. Aurelia's soul wept tears of joy and relief at the sight of her sister.
Dear sister, you finally here.
Aurelia said, greeting her twin sister with joy. Aurelia could barely sort the wave of emotions flowing through her, let alone the words she wanted to say to her. But she didn't have to.
No time to waste. Let's see the stars.
Aurelia led the way up into the heavens without a second to spare, hand in hand with Aurelia. As she was being led away, she looked back towards the Tarnished, who looked back up at her. They gave a solemn nod, and though they spoke no words, she could sense that they were happy for her. And so, ever grateful Aurelia joined her sister in the heavens, up past the clouds to be among the stars, along with her dear twin sister forever and ever.